day, and I was like, well, this is unfair, because his last event we couldn't have because he was sick. The event before that was during COVID, and it's just all of these books that we really need to celebrate haven't been celebrated. So it's just a pleasure to be right, to be wrong for once. I'm so used to being right. So for, I think all of you know, but for the sake of our YouTube, my name is Rosie. I'm the events coordinator here. Just a couple of things before we start. If you have anything that makes noise, like a phone or a watch or any other device that could go off in the middle of this, if you could make sure it won't, that'd be helpful. So of course, we have the books at the counter, and Andy will sign them for you over near where the wine is. So he can sit down and won't have to stand up here. Very conveniently, the cash register is in between here and there. So you can buy your books and then line on up and he'll be ready to sign. And then, very nicely, this time of year, we're able to give back to the community in a very particular way. So if you see these stars behind me, each of those stars is a book that is going to be given to a child in need in Sonoma Valley. So we do this every year. What you can do is go into the kids section, pick out a book, give it back to us, we'll sort it out, and we'll give it to organizations in town. Part of what's really fun about it is these are kids who've never had something new. There are people who get things hand-me-downs, they get things from charity. They don't have something new that's theirs, and getting a new book that's theirs is just a special treat. We actually got to meet the director of La Luz today. He was coming in, and he thanked us for doing that. And really, who we should be thanking is our customers who buy these books and get them to the kids through us. So if you consider doing that, happy to do it. If you feel like you haven't seen a kid's books in 40, 50, maybe even 60 years, you can donate some money. I will pick them out for you. I'm the Children's Buyer, happy to do it. Whichever one works for you. And then at the end of the year, just to give a little something back, we take all the stars down, we put them in a bag, we draw out two, and you get a gift certificate to a certain bookstore I might name. So just, Andy's books really, they're such an easy sell, because you sit there going like, would you like a mystery that'll take you out of yourself, that is still well written, that will tell a good story, and will leave you satisfied? Customer comes up, asks for that, and we go, oh, look at these book covers behind me. Those are Andy's, and you should read them. I could give you guys a long introduction about how the book worked and what Andy's done beyond founding the bookstore and when he started to write all of them and how he has 12 more books lined up and you should all wait for them. But I think Andy's going to do a better job telling you guys about it. So give him a round.
Actually, I'm not.
You're not?
Thank you all, brave people, for showing up here. I almost didn't come, it was so I thought about it and figured what the hell. I was gonna talk about the Gonif, which is the book in question, but there have been 4 other books before it, and I'm now working on the 6th book, and I'm almost done with that, and the 7th and the 8th book are done. So it's like, it's a little crazy making, trying to keep track of all this stuff. And you know, if you're gonna read it, then you don't really need me to tell you about it. I will tell you about it. I'll read a portion of it from the prologue just to give you a taste of it. But what I thought I would do is instead talk about a little bit about what I've learned about writing these things over time. And one of the astonishing things I've discovered is that I don't write fiction. I mean, the book is listed as fiction, and the publisher thinks it's fiction, and we you know, assign it as a mystery, so it's fiction. But what I really do is I try to remember things from 30, 40 years ago. And I'm not very good at that. Maybe you aren't either. But so what I think I call it alternative memoir It's like, you know, they used to say alternative facts. This is alternative memoir. And what that means is I'm remembering bits and pieces of things that happened to me, or that I thought happened to me, or that happened to somebody else and they told me, or that never happened to me exactly, but you know, so it's just little stuff, and it's kind of like panning for gold, you know, and I dredge that up, and that becomes the substance of the writing. I'm not a trained writer. I've been writing since I was 12, but I'm not trained in any way. I've been to a lot of creative writing classes, and maybe you have too. And when you go to a creative writing class, they say, write what you know. And I found out that's another thing that's not true. That makes no sense. Because most of the people taking creative writing classes, at least when I was coming up, they were in their 20s. And I don't mean to be ageist about this, but when you're in your 20s, or even in your 30s, you don't know anything. You have nothing to know.
Nothing happened yet.
Yeah, nothing. You have no. You know, you haven't been hit upside the head with a 2x4 or something, and really impacted. When you're 77, by that time you've been hit a few times. You know, and so my comeback to that is, don't write what you know, write who you are. And whatever that is. Now that may not be much when you're in your early 20s, but it's true at least. That's the first set of things. Second thing is, when you write about an aging detective, what I'm trying to do is remember 30, 40 years back into Los Angeles. I get that wrong a lot because I don't live in Los Angeles, right? And I mean, I once, one time I had somebody murdered in a certain area of Los Angeles, and the publisher at the time says, no, you don't want the body there. You've got to move it. That's too gritty a place. Well, that's too good a place. You move it to a grittier area. So she told me this other area to drop the body out. You know.
Did you live in LA at one time?
I grew up in LA.
Okay.
I grew up in Pasadena and Hollywood.
Okay.
And but we left in '82. Yeah, and we went back recently for a couple of years, and that's when I started doing the series. But LA is, it's a big place, and it's changed a whole lot. So, and so, you're always at sea with a series like this because you're not, the area is changing. I'm always I kind of look at maps of LA and street names that I like, and look up restaurants that might be appealing for this guy to go to. And it's an homage to LA, but it's an LA that I remember from 40, 50 years ago, when you could find a parking place. Stuff like that. Anyway, I went to this detective crime conference that's called Usharam, and they have it every year in a different place, and it's all these detective writers and people who love detective stories, and it's like one of those things. And the publisher said, "Oh, you should go there. You'll get your name out," and blah blah blah. And I went there. It was in Dallas that year, terrible time. But one of the panels I went to discussed how to construct a mystery, and there were basically two different kinds of ways of doing this. One, what I call they're architects. They map these things out before they ever write a word in the mystery. They map it out, and they know the characters ABC. They know their relationships to all the other characters. They know what happened. They do a skeleton outline of the chapters. They know what happens from one chapter to the next, and it's all locked and ready, you know. And then they write the book. That's one group of people, and most of the people on this panel I showed, they were the architects, and then there were other kind of people like me, the seat of the pants guys, you know. And I just sit down and I write, and I'm not. There's no rhyme or reason or plot or anything. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I do. And things develop from there. And some, you know, once in a blue moon it doesn't work out. But the reason it seems to work out mostly is because of the characters, the voice. I've got these characters that I like and that are well-rounded and are human, and they interact with each other, and basically I'm sitting alone in my room with the computer talking to myself, and that's why they come out so fast like that, because it's just me talking to myself. It's not like I have to describe a scene and then get to the next scene and block it out, and it's not as hard if you're talking to yourself. It's really not. What else can I tell you? I don't know, it's good. What I'm doing is therapy, essentially, you know. It seems to be that way. So this particular book is sort of, I take a step back in the sequence of Amos Parisman's adventures. It's a little earlier. It's probably, it's not a prequel, it's like number 2 or 3, I figure, in terms of where the characters are. You know, I don't know if you've read the later ones, like, you know, Die Laughing and so forth. He has his, I don't know if I should give this away or not. Anyway, he develops another love interest in the middle of all this. But this one is before that happens, and it's early on, and he's still in the apartments in Park La Brea and like that. Anyway, maybe I'll read the prologue, and you'll get a sense of the voice, because to me that's the whole book. You know, my mother used to say, towards the last 10-15 years of her life, she loved to watch Seinfeld and those kinds of things. She said, they're my friends. They're not her friends, but for her, they were her friends, and she thought she understood. She also liked Archie Bunker and series.
I like that.
But there was a way that she could relate to them, and they were her friends. And I think there's something to that. If you find somebody in a book that you feel that close to, you're going to continue with it, you know, and that's really, you make that connection. That's what life's about. You know? Okay. Sorry. So, I will read to you from the prologue. I had to be, 9 years old? No taller than a pogo stick, anyway, the first time I heard the word Gonif. We were sitting around our kitchen table with Uncle Al. That was when we lived in that ratty upstairs apartment on Normandy, and Al would come by to visit, angling for a free meal. To tell you the truth, he was my great uncle, my Baba's kid brother, but we didn't make those distinctions back then. To us, he was just Uncle Al. It was Al who taught me how to play poker. He liked kids, dogs, and pretty women, but not necessarily in that order. He liked to laugh. More than anything, he loved to gamble. It dawned on me later in life that he was addicted to gambling. He bet on basketball games, boxing matches, dog races, whatever moved, really. He spent a week in Vegas every year. He'd go to Hollywood Park in Santa Anita, and when he won big, which he did every now and then, he'd take us all out to eat Chinese. Nothing fancy, but since my parents never had much money and never took us anywhere, well, it stood out. When the bill arrived, it was thrilling to watch my uncle pull out a thick wad of green from his pocket and peel off a couple of 20s. Made me feel, I don't know, like royalty. Al always said he immigrated from Canada. That was a lie. He came from Russia. The whole family did. Only for some reason I never understood, he wasn't allowed in. So he went to Toronto instead. Then one night when the border guards were looking the other way, he hiked a mile through the woods and found himself in Vermont. Welcome to America, huh? When he got to LA, he started working at a hot dog stand near Union Station. A few years later, he won the hot dog stand in an all-night poker game. Then he sold it and bought a pawn shop in Reseda. In the end, he was an old man who owned 3 pawn shops in the valley. We were playing poker that afternoon, the 3 of us, me, my dad, and Al. I brought my jar full of coins to the table, which was all I had in the world. It was just a nickel and dime affair, and if there was $2 in the whole pot, I'd be surprised. That's when my dad grabbed Al by the wrist and yelled at him. "You fucking Gonif," he said. "You're dealing off the bottom of the deck." Al's face turned red. My dad stood up and told him, "Nobody cheats, my little boy. Get the hell out. Go on."
Oh.
That was the last time I ever saw Al. A year or so after that, he got colon cancer and died. We went to the funeral in Reseda. The rabbi talked about what a free spirit Al had been, how he thought rules were made to be broken, how he joked his way through life. What a great laugh Al had. Afterwards, in the reception hall, there was an open bar and a huge buffet with roast chicken, chop suey, hot pastrami, kreplach, and little Swedish meatballs. All the foods Al adored. My mom said that as soon as Al found out he was going to die, he set a chunk of money aside. That's how he wanted to be honored with a big party. His treat. We lined up with our plates and shuffled along. I noticed my dad was piling his high. "Are you really going to eat all that?" He winked at me. "Come on, Wojciech, he owes us." That's the prologue.
Nice.
And just to give you a sense, the little nugget in there, that I'm thinking, I know somebody, or knew somebody named Al, who was my best friend's father. And he, in real life, he was he was a gambler. And he lost a lot of money. He lost my friend's college education fund. And he bet it all on the ponies and things. But he was a really nice guy. And he never taught me to play poker. He taught my brother to play poker. But that little bits and pieces of things that are misremembered or partially remembered. Anyway, that's what I have for you. I'm happy to take questions or duck tomatoes or whatever you got. Hi.
Andy, I appreciate your comments, and I've read all your books, including that one, and enjoyed them. But what I'm interested in, how did you get to where you are right now? What's your foundation for being a bookseller and a writer? What happened in your earlier life to get you moving in that direction? Was that a path you chose, or what?
To be a bookseller?
Well, no.
That's
Just
another
what was
story,
your early,
I'll tell you that.
were there early inspirations that made you want to do what you do now, or how'd you end up here? I don't mean end up, I mean, why are you here now in your persona?
Why did I end up here? In the bookstore. The bookstore started because my late wife and I had always thought we had been in the writing business one way or another, different things. Wrote advertising, wrote children's books, she wrote a psychology book. There was a lot of writing in the background. And we were living in Massachusetts and thought about starting a bookstore there. But to do that, we'd have to go into competition with my best friend who owned the bookstore in Lenox, and he was hanging on by his fingernails, still is. And I didn't want to do that. So she would come out here periodically with the kids, we all did sometimes. winter break, and my brother lives here, and she was wandering around the plaza one day with my sister-in-law and noticed there wasn't a New England style literary bookstore in this town. There was a bookstore over by Whole Foods called the Bookends, which is kind of a brand X bookstore. Not bad, but not a real bookstore. My sister-in-law said, "Oh, people really would like one. There used to be one, and went out of business." And the wheels started turning in her head, and she came back to Lenox, Massachusetts, where we were living, and said, "You know, we should quit our jobs and sell the house and move back to Sonoma." We were also missing California, and start a bookstore there. And I said, "Okay." And the next day we put our house on the market, which is not something we normally do when you have those kinds of conversations with your spouse. And 2 days later we had an offer, and suddenly we're moving. So that's the mechanics of how we got here.
And how did you find this location?
Well, my parents had retired up here from Pasadena. My brother was here. We wanted a place near the plaza. We were wandering around. We found it was an architect's office that was moving across the street, and they said, you know, we got in there, and then eventually moved over here.
That's right, you were across the street.
Yeah, we found there first. So that's the geography of all of that. But I'm not quite clear on your question.
Well, I think that's an very interesting part of your business, and it sounds like there were various opportunities for writing with you and your wife that kind of build up to what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, we'd always been doing one thing or another, but like that. This seemed like a way to it could actually make a living. Not a great living, but a living writing. All the other things, I started out trying to be a poet, so obviously we can't make a living doing it.
No, but you started out in that writer's, path. When you
Yeah.
started, that's where I was getting at.
Right. My father wanted me to be an accountant or a pharmacist or something with a paycheck, but I wanted to be a poet.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? Everybody?
I have a question.
Yes,
So you said you have books 7 and 8 written.
yes.
How is it that you have 7 and 8 written?
Because I
Usually,
leapt ahead.
when
Why
I
aren't they number 6?
Well, when I read a series, it chronologically follows that
Mhm.
character,
Well,
and occasionally there'll be a prequel or something like
yeah,
that.
well, this is a sort of a step back. What's happening is, you've got an old man here as the detective, and I keep sandwiching in other books, because I can bring out 7 and 8 next year, but then it's sort of that, 8 would cap it, and it answers a question that starts in book 1. And so I could put in 5 other books in between there if I wanted to. I don't know if I do or not. I don't know if I have the energy, but I'm debating that right now. Yeah.
Could you say more about when you went to the conference in Texas and there were architects and then there's you and
Yeah.
other people like you, I've heard the same thing. The
Yeah.
first line came to them and they thought, okay, well, let's see where
Yeah.
that goes.
Yeah.
But a detective story needs murder, or I don't know, it needs a thing that happens and it needs a guy who did it, or
Well-
it needs a story that hangs together.
Right.
Say more about that.
Okay. First of all, I don't think Amos Parisman is much of a detective.
Okay.
I think he's more of a raconteur, a philosopher, a joker. The thing about a detective story is it's sort of a coat hanger. You hang your clothes on. It gives you a murder, gives you something to solve, gives you a beginning and an end, gives you interactions and all of these kinds of tension and drama. But I couldn't think of any other milieu for him operate in. I mean, you couldn't run a laundromat, you know, and there's not much tension going on there. And so this is their morality plays in some ways. And he gets into those debates with the Lieutenant Malloy, you know, about stuff, and that's all good. But you need some structure to do that with. That's why the mystery. I really have a hard time, I tell you, with the endings of these things, because I don't know who did it when I'm writing these things. I really don't. I have no idea. And when I do get an idea, I think, well, how does this character reveal that he or she is the murderer? What clue can I drop there? It's hard. It's really hard to get inside that, you know. And then you have to have all these red herrings, you know, where you have other people come along that aren't the murderer but look like the murderer. Yeah. So there's all of that. And that's fun. The reason I'm thinking about limiting it to just 8 or so is I don't want this to get too formulaic. I mean, you have somebody like Sue Grafton who goes A to Z or whatever, however far she got. And I think it gets old, you know. The longer I stay away from Los Angeles, it gets particularly old because, you know, it's a growing, living city, and things develop there that I can't go down and research. I don't research, let's put it that way. So, yeah, how about that? So, yes?
Since there's nobody else, can you talk about the first book you ever wrote?
The first book I ever wrote, not a mystery?
The first book, whatever it was.
Oh. Well, I can't even remember the title of the first book I ever wrote. I back in the 70s, I was writing, and I wrote this really terrible book that was just my juvenilia. It was about some kind of a murder. It was supposed to be some sort of it was patterned after something European, like Marguerite Duras or I don't know, those Nouvelle Vague kind of people, and it was a murder, and it was kind of a mythological, a mythic island, and it was terrible. What happened was I started writing it. I wrote it by hand. This was before I had a computer, and I was writing it in the library of this college where I was hanging out with my then girlfriend, and I would write every day. I'd write some, and one day I realized I could write the ending. I don't have to stick to this thing that I'm doing. So I wrote. It was written in kind of a journalistic way, where there were journal entries, you know, and things. So I started writing the journal entries from the end, and then I started backing those up and putting it all, patching it all together. And I got it all together at about 50,000 words, and I read it through, and there were portions that read really well by themselves, but as a piece, it didn't hold. It made no sense. I threw it away. Yeah, and then I got an agent, and I wrote another book called Cities of the Interior, or something like that. And she tried to shop that around. It was a futuristic, semi-sci-fi book in LA about where vegetarianism has taken over, and the rebels, the beatniks in this whole group, the people who are resisting, were the meat eaters, carnivores, and you would see their graffiti scrawled all over the bridges and things. And that was another that got an agent anyway. And then I got the next book after that was a book about about a woman who goes to learn, study English, and this is in Pasadena. And she's being taught English. It's called A New View of Mount Fuji. And it's sort of a combination of Kawabata meets Raymond Chandler. It's a Japanese mystery set in LA. And that was sort of interesting. It's about a woman that's living in this state of terror, and she can't explain it to the English teacher, and he gets obsessed with her, and this and that happened. And that got me. She took it around, tried to sell it, got me 29 rave rejection letters. You know, and they said they like this book, but it's too short. Meaning, it's not long enough. It's not a big enough product for them to sell it for the amount of money that they want to sell it for to make the requisite profit. They said, if you add another 30,000 words, we'll talk. And I said, you know, why add more words to this thing? It's done. The baby's born. You don't add another leg once it's out. So I got I was too much of an artist then, and I got insulted, and I said, screw it, I'll write you a longer book. Let it go. And so I sat down and I wrote a much longer book, with certainly enough words, called The Square. And it's about a man who works in the lawn and garden department at Sears in Pasadena, who has goes off track and has this strange adventure. It's a sort of a family drama. And my agent hated it after 3 years. And she said, well, that's not what California is about. California is about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I said, well, not all of California is about that. They do other things besides that. And I tried to shop that around and didn't get anywhere. And at that point, I was in my 40s. I had a wife and a mortgage and 2 kids, and I said, this is crazy to spend my whole life looking at a screen all day long, not going anywhere. So I stopped writing at that point. This was in the 80s. And I stopped writing until I got back into the bookstore, and this came out. And this has been very successful because mainly I'm just here to have fun with it, you know. I didn't have any big dreams of anything, but it's turned out okay. And I don't have that chip on my shoulder anymore about being an artiste, you know. So.
Candy?
Yeah.
Did you know anybody like Amos?
I knew composites of people like Amos.
Yeah.
Like me, like my dad, like my uncle, and you put them together. But he's not strictly speaking. That's what I'm saying. He's a piece of something.
Well, we know him now.
God willing, yes. Yeah. So.
I just want to say, I'm so glad you stopped in Sonoma and made this bookstore. This is like a haven for us.
Wow.
Andy, it's fabulous.
Happy to have done it.
It is.
Oh, yes.
No, it's been a good run here. We've done well, and you know, I have a
Yes,
larger family here, so that's wonderful.
big time.
That's really wonderful. It's too bad it's raining. We could have had an even bigger family. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and appreciate it.